Attendance has been taken. We haven't heard from Councillor Chambers, so I'm suggesting with the weather not being ideal, he's probably on a side road in the fog at the moment, but I'm sure he's on his way. Councillor Miller is away on vacation, so he won't be attending tonight. Everyone else is accounted for. Approval of the agenda, please, with the amended pieces. Thank you. Councillor Coleman, seconded by Councillor Ferrier. Declaration of pecuniary interests. Seeing none. Motion to meet as committee of the whole. Councillor Bell and Councillor Pierce. All those in favor? We sit as a committee of whole. All right. Michael, you want to take it away?
Good evening, Mayor Bailey and members of council. Just a few housekeeping items. First of all, I wanted to indicate that we have just left some loose paper on the desks for this evening. I'll just go through it. There's a draft budget. It's a short presentation I'm going to give over the course as we go through these items. It's just got some further information on it. There's some information that the OPP provided. I think it's a replacement slide from their presentation, and I think it's fairly straightforward. I think that was emailed out to the members of council. So there's an updated, there's a list of materials and supplies. So in each department line, there's a materials and supply line, and there was asked for some further breakdown of that. So we provided for some further breakdown. It's not into the great detail, some what I would call middle detail. Hopefully that just helps to qualify, because some of those numbers are pretty big. They've got a lot of items in them. So, and then the last sheet that we handed out was just a breakdown of, this is in the capital budget. There was a question of our IT capital budget, what we do with that money, and so it breaks down the kind of project list, and I thought it was fairly straightforward. So that's just the housekeeping items, Your Worship. So what I wanted to just open the meeting with tonight, if I could, is just a few comments. This is our fourth budget meeting. I think it's been an engaged and very productive discussion. I think at the outset of the meeting, or of the budget, I said that this would be both a decision-making process and an orientation experience, and I think we've definitely achieved that. There's been lots of questions back and forth, and I think it's a lot of work for both council and staff, and I think we should all be congratulated for that. Now, I'm assuming that this could be our last budget meeting, but that is, of course, council's decision whether you want to wrap it up this evening and make a committee of the whole recommendation to council. Our proposal for this evening is to finalize any inputs into the base budget. We're of the belief that there probably aren't any more, except there was a couple of outstanding matters with grants, or I think there was one outstanding matter. You've, over the course of the last 4 meetings, you've received departmental presentations, presentations from external agencies, a fairly detailed presentation on the capital budget, and proposals from community organizations for funding grants. And we've asked many questions and answered many questions, or you've asked many questions and lots of answers have been given. There was one remaining question from the last meeting. So there's our budget roadmap. You've seen it before, and so we are at that February 7th, that last of the arrow boxes, but we can add additional arrow boxes if council wishes. So. There was a couple questions. The development charge reserve, the police budget, there was a question was why was it in a negative. So this is the amount that was identified as development charge funding for the new OPP detachment, and those funds were transferred to the capital budget, and that budget will remain in a negative until we collect those development charges, and that goes for those other budget lines as well. So I think that's a fairly straightforward answer to that question. There was a question about the grant request from the women's sledge hockey team, and as I understand it, they had requested $10,000 to fund hosting a national team training camp and an exhibition. And the question is how much had we given previously to the men's sledge hockey team? And we haven't ever given them a grant. They have received non-prime pricing advantages for ice time at the arenas. So. In 2017, we did give the women's sledge hockey team a grant for $750, and we gave them some discounted ice times as well. So that's the answer to that question. And so that's our kind of where we stand with the base budget. So the base budget at this point, it has a $51.9 million tax levy, which is a budget increase of 1.5%. But then if we incorporate new assessment, then that results in a decrease to the average tax bill of 1.1%. That includes the additional grants that were approved at the last meeting outside of the current grant budget we'd carried into the base budget. So So that's the base budget as it stands this evening, Your Worship. And I guess outstanding questions are there any other grants that committee wishes to approve this evening? And are there any other movement, is there any other movement in the base budget, or is this committee prepared to basically endorse the base budget before we start moving into decision packages? It's our position with council is that before we start thinking about new spending, we should really make sure that the existing spending is satisfactory. So, because I don't think it's our recommendation that we start approving new spending and new positions if we're not satisfied with the base budget. So, that's my kind of opening comments, Your Worship, and I have some other comments as we move forward.
Thank you.
Of course.
I think we should deal with the grant that's before us then for the women's hockey. They've asked for $1,000. We've given them $750 before. If there could be,
10,000.
I'm sorry, 10,000. And we've given them $750 before.
750 before.
Is it? Anyone want to speak to, I mean, it's a big difference between 750 and 10,000. Anyone want to speak to it? Councillor Wheat?
Well, I'll speak to it. I think I should make the motion first and then speak to the motion.
All right.
I would stay at the 750 with the reduced rental annex. I'll make that motion. 750 like we did last year and with the reduced rate.
Thank you. Seeking a seconder. Councillor Bell. Any other discussion? Call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. So that's going to be added. Anything else to add before we confirm the, Councillor Wheat?
Yes, I'd like to revisit that historical grant to the Paris Museum.
Okay.
It passed at 15,000. I was prepared to make it 20 if the 15 was defeated, but the 15 passed.
Can I have a seconder to put it back on the floor? Councillor Ferrier? Any discussion on Councillor Wheat's motion to put it back on the floor for additional funds? Councillor Howes?
I think at the meeting I missed last week, Councillor LaFerrier did speak on my behalf. I'm the liaison to the museum. And I firmly believe that as our municipality grows, that embracing our history and embracing our heritage is going to be an important ingredient in maintaining some of the small town charm that people like about this town. And I think the museum is doing a good job and have plans to do an even better job moving forward, and I would endorse giving them the 20,000.
Thank you. Councillor Pierce?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. So a couple things here. First of all, I agree with what Councillor House just said there, that there's a lot of things they want to do, a lot of things that they're going to do, but let's back this up a little bit. Now, correct me if I'm wrong here, but in normal council, if there's a motion that's passed, you need 2/3 to bring it back up on the table to discuss. Does that work the same way within?
I was going to bring that up. I'm glad you have.
Madam Clerk?
It is a motion that was,
This hasn't actually gone to council yet, so
Okay.
that's the difference in terms of this process. So council hasn't considered the actual grant, so committee can still make a different recommendation if.
okay, as long as that's the case, I just want to make sure we were
It's
following
not a
the right.
reconsideration yet because it hasn't been approved by council.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure we were following the proper process there. And just to speak to it a little further, I think we're good where we are with the 15,000, and that's still going to allow them to do a lot of things, and next year is another year as well. So, not that I'm opposed to what they do, I think what they do is great, and it is very important, but I think the 15,000 is sufficient.
Okay. Welcome to the late, great Councillor Chambers. The discussion on the floor is revisiting the grant given to the museum we approved, in theory, 15, and Councillor Wheat's got it on the floor for an additional 5, bringing it back to the ask at 20. He's been seconded, and we're on discussion. Any other discussion on taking it back to 20,000? Councillor Gatward.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Was the original request from the Paris Museum 20,000 or 15?
Yes, ma'am.
It was
It
20,000?
was 20, wasn't it?
Okay. And that's what we gave to the St. George
That's right.
Memorial Hall, who looks after the museum there?
Yes, ma'am.
And I think at the last meeting, I said, shouldn't we be consistent and give them both the same? So I'm pleased to hear that we're going to do that. My other question, Mr. Mayor, is I didn't see anything on here for the Brant County Museum. Traditionally, they've had a line item on our budget, and they are on Charlotte Street in Brantford, but they are the museum for the whole county. They do county
Point of order,
displays.
Mr. Mayor, we are not discussing Grant County Museum, that's another item in itself. We're discussing Paris Historical.
Yeah, I realize that. I just wondered why if anybody knows why they're not on here.
Okay, I don't think that they applied for anything, Counselor Gatward. If they had of, they certainly would have been considered. We were giving away money like banshees that night, so I'm sure they would have got it. So we're on the floor for taking it back to 20, and we're going to call the vote without any more conversation. All those in favor of taking it back to 20? Opposed? And it's carried. So they're going to get their 20, which is consistent with the South Dumfries Historical Society, which does make it consistent. Well, you didn't. Sunshine, you were right on top of it. Counselor Pierce.
It's okay, Mr. Mayor, I had something else that I wanted to say on that, but it's already gone and passed, so that's fine.
I'd like to hear what
Sure.
even
Counselor Pierce,
well, out of respect.
your concerns?
Thank you, and as I say, if, I understand the concept of keeping the two together, but if you look at what was put down as the grant notes for the two of them, you know, for example, with the, and don't get me wrong here, I'm not against what they do, but I'm just trying to compare the two here. When one says, help sustain the ongoing expenses of the facilities, help continue to preserve history and heritage, and replace a large screen TV to increase public access. That was for Paris. If we flip over to, where is it here? Sorry, right at the bottom here. It talks here about capital improvements, which include windows, exterior pointing, like we're talking building things here, exterior pointing, HVAC improvements. Like, I don't think we're talking apples to apples here. Again, we've talked around this horseshoe and the fact that we don't mind helping anybody out, and that's what these grants are for, to help out. But when it's, you know, when it's helping to sustain the day-to-day, I just, again, I felt that 15,000 was sufficient for this year. I had my piece. We had a vote and voted the other way, so let's
Thank you.
move on.
Thank you. The ship has sort of sailed. I'm sorry if I rushed that through and you didn't get a chance to speak to it. Anything else to be considered for the budget before the total gets firmed up? No? Okay, Michael?
Thank you. So, Mayor Bailey, our proposal is that a recommendation to approve the base budget, subject to any further, this would not restrict council from making further, but at least it allows us to confirm that the base budget as presented is acceptable and to move on to new spending initiatives. So the treasurer can probably give us that final number because there was just a few adjustments made, so. She is hooking her laptop up to the,
Counselor House? Do we need staff to speak first? Do you want to confirm the final total before we vote? That is it?
The net levy where we stand right now is $51,993,943.
With nothing to be added or deleted, that's it.
That's with the grants that have just been approved.
So a motion to accept. Counselor House to get on the floor, seconded by Counselor Bell. Any discussion? Counselor Gatward.
Could we have the treasurer tell us, was that previous slide that was up, that translated to the increase, tax increase?
Come on.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the grants that were just approved add 31 cents to your median home and bring us till still, we're sitting at the 1.1, $30.82 reduction to that median home. Reduction on your median home.
Feeling good about that, Councillor Gatward? You look happy. Any other comments? We're going to call the vote. All those in favor of accepting these figures? Opposed? Accepted. Michael?
Thank you, Mayor Bailey. So at this point, we are proposing to move on to decision packages. So I think I mentioned this in opening comments to the budget, but we and a lot of our neighbors, we present new spending initiatives as decision packages. At the city, they call them unmet needs, but they're basically new spending initiatives. A number of what we're presenting tonight are full-time positions. It's a continuation of a capacity-building initiative that we've been undertaking for a few years right now, and I spoke about this in my opening comments. I'd just like to suggest to council that they could be broadly divided into three categories. There are a number of positions that we presented that would increase frontline services. These would be a range from maintenance personnel to people who do business development, bylaw enforcement, and building inspectors, right to counter service people. So, the second category I would put them in is what I'm calling policy heft. There's a couple of positions around environmental planning and park planning. These will basically bolster our ability to generate and articulate new policy and new planning initiatives for the organization as we grow as a municipality. And then the third category would be support services. I call this the back line. We've got frontline services. These would be people in the back of the organization around IT support, administrative support, and human resources support. So it's a package that we've laid out to, again, further bolster our capacity in the organization to both to improve our ability to deliver the municipality services, as well as to be ready for a growing population. So, depending on the position, some of them are funded by the tax levy, others are funded by different rates, and some are funded by user fees, and there's some other sources of funding that's articulated in the decision packages. And our broader objective through a lot of these new positions are to balance workloads, to resource understaffed areas, and to resource critical activities that we're currently dealing with, what I would like to call on the corner of people's desks. And so to move it to the center of people's desks is the way I like to put it. So there's other initiatives that also outlined in the decision packages that are recommended by staff around capital spending and around other spending initiatives. There's a filming strategy, for example, that's quite intriguing. So, and then there's some further requests by community groups, external agencies, and other requests that council has requested to come forward to the budget process. So, one thing I wanted to mention, and maybe if the treasurer could, I'll just refer to the slide. It was in the slide package I handed out. Do you want to switch over, just so I can show this?
If at any time you want Michael to explain in more detail, I've had the chance to speak with Michael, so I know sort of a little bit about what's behind the slide. But if you're not sure of something, this is the time to ask questions for clarification.
So, continuing, Your Worship, we've been defining our I think, laying out our decision packages and ranking them in three ways: critical needs, best management, and enhanced services. And the lines between these blur a little bit, but critical needs are what we call immediate attention required to maintain a current level of service. As an example, with the paramedic services, we've brought forward additional paramedics in the past, basically to keep up with increasing call volume. And we call the best management initiatives, and these are additions of spending or addition of staff to alleviate pressures and provide efficiencies. So often a lot of our staffing requests fall into these. And then an enhancement of service, these are additional new services that will provide a higher level of service. And usually these have come from a request of some form, either from the public, from council, or even through staff and dealing with various stakeholders. So the gravel to hardtop conversion is a good example of this, where people are coming forward and saying, we want this enhanced level of service. So what we have, I want to note that the budget is an evolutionary thing, and we continue to examine it even after we start the budget process. And we do have a proposal for council to consider, and that's around the phasing in of positions. So historically, we have budgeted new positions in the budget on a full-year basis. We did that for a couple of reasons, because it does, if you don't do that, then you have a budget hit in your next year. And in some of our leaner years in the past, this became a problem. We were dealing with decreasing provincial funding and some uncontrolled expenses that were rolling into our municipality. And these, having them not annualized in the approval year, became a problem in the following year. But we've moved into a different financial phase of our organization's maturity, in our opinion, in that we're seeing a lot of growth. And Mr. Gravel talked about that on Tuesday night and the number of permits that we expect to issue this year, and we're all seeing this. So we have quite a bit of new assessment to smooth our budget. And you've seen we've brought a base budget in with a decrease to the average taxpayer. So you know, we would be open to council considering not phasing them in on an annual basis, but phasing them on a half-year basis. We're proposing a June initiation, because we can't obviously hire people for January 1st when we're here in the middle of February. And if we think about the process to post and the process to interview and the process to hire and the gap of people giving notice, it's clearly not feasible. So we are now, I think we've transitioned into being more open to not annualizing these positions and budgeting only for a partial year, and then bringing the annualization costs into next year's budget. We think next year's budget will be more, based on our projections for growth over the course of this year. This won't be a huge impact for next year's opening budget. So, as an example, if all of the decision packages for all of these full-time positions were approved, and this will be council's decision, it would result in a $412,000 savings over what's currently reflected in our decision package list, or basically a reduction of 0.8%. So that's something that this council could decide right at the beginning of this, is that we're going to do that for all the positions, or you could leave them as we've stated in the initial decision package. So again, we've had quite a bit of discussion about this over the last 2 weeks, and we think it's prudent for us to bring it forward now. It would allow you to achieve a lower budget figure going into budget approval figures.
Councilor Ferrier,
I'll put that motion on the floor to phase it in June.
seconded by Councilor Bell. Any conversation? Councilor Bell?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Michael. Question of sequestration of budgets. If you happen to find you have some money left over on a budget you didn't fully use, are you free to use it to offset over expenditures elsewhere? Or does each line item have to balance each time?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we would normally request council to move money in mid-budget. That would be our normal approach. Now a budget is just an estimate. Some our utility lines may go over, they may not. But if we project a savings and we decide we want to do something else with those, with the budgeted figure, we would usually ask the appropriate committee.
No, the reason I ask it, it's sort of inbuilt contingency, and I don't want to make it more difficult for you to manage than is necessary.
Councilor Coleman, did you have your hand up? No, Councilor Pearson, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you to Michael. So I'm in favor of this phasing, but I just want to know, are there any of these, like we're just grouping everything together here, are there any of these that you feel that we should pull and do it for the whole year, or does it make sense, the reason you have them up there, is everything good to go in June? I want your feeling.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, no, we believe that June would be an applicable date. So in the event that we do get somebody for an April start, we're also probably going to have somebody in an August start. So that goes to Councilor Bell, that one budget line will be over, one will be under, it'll probably balance out.
Yep, I take that, thank you.
Councilor Gatward?
I agree with all the critical need items on the list. Are we going to go through any of these and discuss ones that we want to discuss? Or are
Only
we-
if it's your desire, Councilor Gatward.
Well, there's some that I would like to speak to that I don't think are totally necessary. And
Point of order, Mr. Mayor, we're not at that point yet. We're just talking about the phasing of the positions. We haven't got to the point where we're going through them yet.
Okay, so we're still at discussion. Counselor
So,
Gatward,
so
you'll
the
get it.
phasing doesn't automatically approve
No,
all these positions,
no.
okay?
Well, you can speak
That's
to
fine.
something later. Any other conversation? Counselor Wheat?
I was just going to say, Mr. Mayor, there's a motion on the floor, it's been seconded for phasing, and I would like you to call the vote so we can get started.
All right, call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? And carried? That was, my hand was up for that. It's cramping. It's cramping. Okay, Councilor Gatward, would you like to speak to one or separate something?
Mr.
Oh, Michael?
So,
Well, Councilor Gatward's nervous about the fact that everything's being grouped together. Councilor Wheat?
What I'll do is try and move this along. There's 6 items right at the top that are critical need.
Right.
And I will move those 6 for approval, the critical need, and I'll move those 6 seeking second. I'll second.
Councilor Pierce?
And then if a member wants to separate one of them, it's on the floor for
All right.
that individual.
All right, so the first 6 are on the floor. Any conversation to any of those 6? Councilor Bell?
Item 2, and it's almost a friendly amendment to this one. We talked when we had the Burford Community Improvement Plan about removing the overhead power lines. This is a great time to do it. If you're digging up the road and putting in new drainage, can we include in the scope of that plan that we look at dealing with the overhead power lines at the same time?
Michael?
through you, Mr. Mayor, no, that project, a master plan project has already been approved, and in fact, it'll trigger as soon as the community improvement plan is approved. A downtown master plan, similar to what we're doing here in Paris, was approved last year. So you don't need to amend the scope of this project because a project has already been identified to do
Okay, we
to
did
deal with.
talk about it in the community improvement plan discussion, specifically about the overhead lines. And when you're digging holes, let's use all the opportunity we can.
Any other discussion on the first 6? Seeing none, call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? And carried. Next, Michael. Councilor Wheat. Oh,
Mr. Mayor, if I could, just before we go any further, so the treasurer has now switched screens, and she will be keeping a running total, so you'll be able to see what your tax levy impact of these decisions you're making are, and she will be bringing in any new positions, we'll be moving those to a June start date as opposed to a January 1st start date, so my apologies for interrupting.
perfect, thank you. Councilor Wheat.
I'll move the items listed as best management, which starts at number 7 and continues on to the end of the library, number 33. I'll move them, and then if somebody wants to...
Seconded by Councilor Coleman. Councilor Pierce wants to speak to it.
If I could, Mr. Mayor, I would agree with that, but I would like to, if I could, pull 31 and 33. I'd like to speak to those.
Okay?
So if Mr. Wheat would do a friendly amendment and go right down to 30, I'm good with that.
Well, it went down...
Went to 33.
The last item, the numbering might be a bit different because we got a new page. But it goes down to library where it was the children's services assistant. So that would be the last one.
Yeah, 33.
From after the critical needs.
Yep.
Down to library, children's services assistant. I was moving the whole group of them.
And you have a seconder, Councilor Coleman. You've separated some, so can we vote on the ones that are still? So can we, Councilor Gatward?
I have some that I wish to have pulled from that list to discuss, Mr. Mayor.
All right, what numbers?
I have a question about number 14
14,
and number 15.
15,
Also,
If I could, Mr. Mayor,
no, you can't. I have the floor.
to identify, because the numbering could be different, because we got new pages inserted into this book.
And I'm using the new page. I'm using the new page.
continue, Councilor Gatward.
Number 27. Number 32. And I also had number 31 that Councillor Pierce wished to speak to.
Okay,
I think I've covered them all.
Anyone else have anything? Counselor Bell?
Yeah, I'd like to, I have a question about 24 and 25. I'm not opposing them, it's just a question of whether they're in the right place in this budget.
Okay. Any other? There's not many left in. We should have just done them one at a time. Oh, well. Okay, so the ones that are still on the floor, that Councillor Wheat has made a motion to accept. There's no other conversation. It's been seconded. All those in favor are the ones that haven't been pulled out of the package. Okay, thank you. All those opposed? None. Okay, so we'll start with number 14. Councillor Gatwood, what's your concern?
We hired one lot grading technician, Mr. Mayor, and this is the second one. And when I read the description, I wondered why this cost is being levied to the taxes. Why wouldn't it be a neutral cost like the two positions above, the plans examiner and the additional building inspector? Because when I read the description, it seemed like this lot grading technician was to keep up with permits. And so wouldn't it be covered by our charges? And
Michael?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. So there is an income stream attached to lot grading. So some of the, in terms of the site alteration permits, but there's also quite a bit of lot grading activities that go along with building permits and everything. And we can't fund that through the building permit fees. So there is, the first position we have was fully funded by fees. We're proposing that the fees may not be adequate, but there's still important work to do. Grading has been an ongoing issue for the county on new development as well as in rural areas. So you know, we do believe that, and I think this was outlined in probably the development services review that came forward, that the tax levy does have to pay for some of these things. So if we could have justified a fee, you know, a fee recovery on this, we would have recommended it.
so we can't use building fees, but why can't we use development charges?
This would not be development charge applicable. The development charges can only be charged for infrastructure.
Oh, and not,
No.
Okay.
So there is a, just for maybe further context, there's a site alteration permit that the county, there's a site alteration bylaw the county has. It requires a permit. The permit has a fee attached to it, and the fee's basically based on the amount of material being moved. And so it's generated a positive cash flow, but inadequate probably to staff. And that was identified, that it probably would not generate enough money to pay for the permitting, but it was something that's been identified repeatedly over the years as a concern of the community, both in the rural and urban areas, and an ongoing concern that comes forward after development is approved.
so the answer would be the same, the second one, number 15, the Development Services and Strategic Initiatives Assistant. It can't be recovered either.
Michael?
Through you, Mr. Chair. No, again, if we thought we had the fee structure, and you have to remember that development fees, the Planning Act lays out what we can charge for and what we can't charge for. And so if we can, if we can recover costs through fees, we will do so. But the Planning Act says there's a list of things you can recover from fees, and that is an appealable fee. So we have to be cautious. So we use our judgment. We sometimes get professional advice on what we can recover from permitting fees, from various permitting fees, from the building inspection permit, et cetera, et cetera. So.
Thank you.
Thank you. 27, who wanted to speak to 27?
Well, there was 24 and 25 first.
Okay, 24 first?
Sir, if I might, since we've discussed those two, should we vote on them? Because we're going to have, in my opinion,
Okay.
6 or 7 of these to discuss. There may be some that I like, some that John likes, some that John doesn't like, some that Steve likes. Rather than group them,
Okay.
might it be easier to just
Yep.
do them one at a time? Is there, that's just my
Yep,
opinion.
that's a good idea.
That's all I need to make a decision.
No, it keeps things very clean, so we'll do 14 first. I need to put it on the floor.
Yeah, I'll move that.
Councillor Wheat, Back on the floor with Councillor Coleman. Any other conversation? All those in favor of approving number 14? Thank you. Number 15, Councillor Wheat, Councillor Coleman. Any other discussion? All those in favor? 15? Opposed? Carried? I didn't vote. 24.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question was one about principle here. I think doing these packages is the right thing to do, but I don't understand why these are up for decision when they're not just simply in the capital budget. And I'll dare to say, we approved a 10.7 million item without any discussion in this table. And here we're talking about whether we approve 300,000. I just want, it's the philosophy behind it that I'm struggling with.
Thank you, Mayor Bailey. And it's sometimes why things end up in decision packages and not in the base budget or in the capital plan is how they flow through council. And in this case, if I recall, there was a report that came to, it was Public Works Committee, or yeah, and it was referred to. It was referred because there was some comments that came from the public about the project, and it was referred to the budget as a decision package, I believe. And so that's why it's in a decision package. So sometimes, again, I agree with you, and sometimes it just depends on how these flow through council, whether they're recommended specifically as referred to the budget staff, put this in the budget, or put this in front of council for a decision in the budget. And so it's a different path for some projects. So.
I don't want to undo the community health hub decision, by the way.
Councillor Ferrier?
I'd like to move both 24 and 25. Neither have an impact to the levy, and I'd like to move and seek a seconder.
Councillor Coleman, for both 24 and 25? Yep. So they're both up, back on, okay. All those in favor of accepting 24 and 25? Opposed? Okay, they've gone through. Let's do 27 next, just because. it's
Thank
on the-
you.
Thank you. Councillor Gatward.
Yes, this is for a facility maintenance, cleaning and grounds and equipment maintenance person for the Scotland Community Centre. And the total salary and benefits is $65,000. I don't agree with this way of having someone come in and help clean the facility. And we do have a building and property maintenance people that do maintenance on some of our community centers. We use janitors to clean a lot of our community centers, and we hire them on a contract or word of mouth to come in 3 times a week or as needed at an hourly rate to clean our community centers. We don't have to pay benefits. We don't have to buy a truck for them, which is one of the other items on here for this staff person. The janitor would have his own truck, he'd have his own equipment, and I can't support number 27.
Councillor Pierce?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, I don't see that this is a, quote, janitor position. I'm trying to understand where you're seeing that, Councillor Gatward. If you read the description, there's a lot of different things that this person is doing now as part-time and will get more on their plate as a full-time.
Like working at the pool from May to September, which could be a student position in the summer. If you take this person out of the community center, if he's needed so badly at the community center, how can you afford to take him out of there for 4 months and put him at the pool in Paris? Who's going to do the work from May to September? I know that there's a part-time person there now, and I think leaving that person would be suitable. They can do many of the jobs, the bookings, and the coordinating, et cetera, but I'm not in favor of making this a full-time position. I don't believe we need it, and especially to deliver successful programs and services. Our staff that work out there on programs do a great job, and they're the ones we need. And some cleaning or maintenance, the grounds, that can be done by the janitor. It's done by our staff now. They come to, say, the Oakland Community Center, they pick up the garbage in the bins outside. They look after any problems outside. The inside is done by a janitor, which costs us very little, so.
Thank you, Councillor Gatward. Councillor Wheat, and then Councillor Pierce.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. I'm going to speak in favor of this. If you'll recall, trying to help the new members of council, this was a very controversial purchase. This is the St. Anthony Gang School. It wasn't unanimous for us to purchase it. We did. And I think it's been one of the municipality, county, whatever you want to call it, success stories. We didn't know whether it would work, and it did. And it's even better than I ever hoped it would be. I had hopes that would be successful, and it's beyond successful. And we need to take this person and turn him from part-time to a full. I'm supporting.
Thank you, Councillor Wheat. Councillor Pierce.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm absolutely supporting this as well, and I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but there's one particular part of the description, job description here that classifies as cleaning. There's many other things that this particular individual will be doing, and Councillor Gatward talked about them being at the Paris pool. It doesn't say they're going to be there 8 hours a day. It says to assist with opening and ongoing maintenance and closure of the pool. But what's even more important than that is if you read the first line of the justification, there's been over 1,700 bookings to this facility. Need I say more? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pierce. Councillor Ferrier.
Thank you, through you, Your Worship. I'd just like to look at the consequences of not funding, and I do understand Councillor Gatward's point of view on this, but continued demand, we're already utilizing overtime for this person, which has a higher cost to municipality, and this person, if they are full-time, they will help us with some extra revenue, so this is why I'll be voting in support of it.
Thank you. Councillor Chambers.
And I too support the decision package. To characterize the position as janitorial is not doing the position justice at all. You have to remember that now the Scotland facility is one of the busiest facilities in the county, and to staff it part-time is not doing justice to the activity going on there. And once again, it's far more than a janitorial position.
Any other conversation before we call the vote to put it back in the package and approve it? All those in favor? Opposed? Thanks, Councillor Gatward, for the conversation. 32. Councillor Pierce. Oh, okay. 31 and 33?
Yes, so for 31,
All right.
I totally get the fact that there is I'm going to use my microphone here. There's a crap ton of parks coming on, and which is fantastic for the county. I believe that Kathy's been doing a lot of this work for parks and such like that through Parks and Rec, which is just part of what her job description is. So I think this is a fantastic idea with what's coming into the county, and I'm fully supporting of this. And if you read through it, again, the numbers speak that the position is required, and there's also expertise there with, no offense to our staff right now, but maybe we don't have that, and there's expertise that comes with this position. And I think if they were to get the person that's described within the description of this and the outline of this, it's going to be a total asset to the county. So I just wanted to speak quickly to that. I think this is a great idea, especially with the way we're moving, and I'm fully supporting it.
Any other conversation? There was
Sorry. Yeah.
yeah. Okay. Any other Councillor Gatward?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, when I saw this item, I thought, yeah, we do have a lot of growth and some parks coming on board with that growth. We don't plan a lot of new parks in our existing areas where there's existing parks. And I'm wondering, if this position is for new growth, shouldn't it pay for itself through development charges, through the recreational development charges that we charge when we sell all these subdivision lots. Because that's, sounds to me like this park planner is going to be doing those new parks. And if we, unless we're going to redesign some of our older parks, I don't know. It didn't speak to that in the description, but I'd like to hear from our CAO if we could not use development charges to pay for this position.
Thank you. Mr. Bradley?
Ms. Stevenson can answer the question.
Ms. Stevenson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, this position was originally identified through the Development Services Review that was completed last year. And as part of that review, it was recommended that 60% of engineering fees could be utilized to fund this position. So it is my understanding that those fees will be utilized to partly support funding this position.
Engineering fees?
Engineering fees collected through development services.
Oh, so that we can use.
Correct.
Okay. So it would only be 50% funded. Instead of 100,000, it would be 50,000?
My understanding is that 68% of engineering fees collected could be utilized towards the position. I don't have the exact dollar figure.
The percentage should be enough for, does that clarify it for you?
Well, it does. It makes me feel a little better about this position. But should we be altering the impact to the levy number after what we've just heard? I think Michael or?
No, I think staff is, are you going to speak to it? Can you speak to it? Can you pull numbers out of your
I
hat?
prefer the treasurer answer that question.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. The revenue is already included in the budget because those fees are currently being charged, but we don't have the planner to do the work currently. That'll help.
Can you say that again?
The revenue is included in your base budget because the fees are in place, but we're currently doing it in-house, so this position would allow us to do it.
So if it's in the revenue, why can't we reduce the expense here of 100,000?
Because it's already in the base budget. We've already accounted for it.
We already approved the revenue, but not the expense.
It's like voting on disbursements. Doesn't make any sense.
Thank you.
Councillor Coleman?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think when you flip the page and look at the next page, what it says, pending the subdivision and pending projects, it's anticipated 15 new parks will need to be planned and constructed in the next 15 years. That sums it all up there in one line. Call the vote, Mr. Mayor.
Any other discussion? I've been demanded to call the vote. I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you, it's carried.
Mr. Mayor, if I could.
Sure.
What we can do is we'll look into this further. I'm not quite following what's happening there. So we can always bring forward an amendment on this before it gets to council. If we've miscalculated this and there is a revenue offset to this, we can adjust that before council does final approval of the budget. So we'll take that into consideration.
Okay. So is there any more? Councillor Pierce?
Yeah, for number 33.
Yep.
So, again, I understand here we're dealing with children and youth, and the increases are just crazy, but again, I'm a numbers guy, and the numbers aren't adding up here. Because when it talks about 30 hours a week to 35 hours a week, that's an additional 5 hours a week. So if you figure that out over a year, it's 260 hours a year. If you take the difference of the 20,934 and you divide that by 260 hours, that's $80 an hour.
I've applied.
I was just gonna say, where do I apply? Is that correct? That can't be correct.
Mr. Bradley?
But still, $80 an hour?
Counselor House first.
Would it be appropriate for us to have the library CAO step up and explain?
Sure would. Welcome to my nightmare.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. The actual cost includes the hours increase, so the 5 hours that you've calculated, but also benefits. Moving this position from part-time to full-time will incur benefit costs. So approximately a third of the cost is for the actual salary, and 2/3 of the cost will be benefits.
Counselor Pierce?
Okay, so again, keep in mind here that I'm only calculating this on the increase, right? So the position right now is 30 hours, so there's 0 benefits with that position.
That's
Is that
correct.
correct? So what we're saying here is that $15,000, it's going to be $15,000 for benefits?
That is the current cost for benefits, the entire benefit package.
Counselor Ferrier?
One of the things we heard time and time again when we talked to our staff at the county about why we have such good staff is because we promote from within. We encourage people to come here, learn, stay loyal. If we were to deal with the service level issue by hiring a temp worker for $5 hours a week, I think that would send a philosophical message to our library staff that I wouldn't like to send. So I will be supporting this.
Counselor Wheat?
Thank you. I'm supporting it, and look on your package to the consequences of not funding.
Thank you, Counselor. Oh,
We're
sorry.
getting more calls from Mount Pleasant and Onondaga, and we can't do it, we can't service those undersized, and we're trying to, it's the Brant County Library System. We're trying to service library services throughout the county, and this is going to help us do that. We've had complaints ever since I've been on council about the service to Onondaga, and we're trying to improve that service to Onondaga, and this is only going to help us. I'm supporting it.
Counselor Pierce?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So for the record, I never said that I wasn't supporting
No.
it. What I did say is the fact of the increases, I get that, this is a fabulous thing. The only concern I had was the $80 an hour. I guess it's a learning for me that I didn't understand that benefits were that much. So let's move on. Thank you, you've answered my question.
Anything else? Let's call the vote to accept it, put it back in the package. All those in favor? Opposed? It's back. That's all of them, right? Okay. So item 34. Now, do you want to do these one at a time, or are people going to start pulling these out on me?
Could I,
Counselor Mark?
yeah, can I move, I'd like to make a motion for 38, 45, and 46 because they don't have an impact to the levy.
38. Which else, Mark?
38, 45, and 46 have no impact to the levy, and I'd like to make a motion to approve those.
46, okay. Do you want to,
You read those numbers again, please?
Yeah, sure. 38,
38.
45, and 46 have no impact to the levy, and I'd like to move to approve them.
Counselor Pierce, second to that? Any conversation to those three? Vote on those three only. All those in favor?
Yep.
Carried. Okay, so they're gone. So 34 is where we are now. Let's do them, can we do them one at a time from here on in? Anybody have anything to say about 34? Moved on the floor, second by Coleman. Third by Wheat. All those in favor? That's great. That ties it up beautifully.
Actually, I thought we had that person. I hate to name names, but we took that individual out of Paris' office, and I thought she was already doing it.
There you go.
But Joanne DeCosta.
So we're at 30, that was 34?
Oh, I'm supporting it, I just thought we already had that person.
We're at 35 now. Any conversation? Counselor Coleman, Counselor Howes, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Next is 36. On the floor with Counselor Howes, seconded by Counselor Pierce. All those in favor? Oh, Counselor Gatward.
The environmental plan, not this item, when you're looking at all of our new plans of subdivisions for environmental design, and if so, would part of this position be funded by either building or development charge?
Mr. Bradley?
Thank you. Through you, Your Worship. So 25% of this position would be funded through fees. The balance, again, this is one of these things where we just can't justify a full fee recovery on this position. So its intent is fairly broad. It is a gap in our current staffing offering here at the County Environmental Planning. The Trees Conservation Committee and tree bylaw is becoming a greater, there's change to legislation, so it's becoming a fairly more significant workload for staff that we have no talent for right now, as well as the impacts of environmental impact studies through the planning process. We have no in-house depth to deal with those. And there's a host of other areas and that an environmental planner can add depth to for our organization. So again, we've reached that level of maturity where we are going to start to need things like park planners and environmental planners and things that we could get away with in the past. We would be often, if we need environmental planning depth in our organization, relying on third parties through peer review consultants or others. So we feel this is an appropriate step right now.
So is this a three-quarter position then? Because it says .75 FTE, and it's three-quarters of the salary, 101,000?
Mr. Bradley?
I think the impact of the levy is it's three-quarters of a full-time position. These are hard folks to recruit, so it's probably paid at a fairly high rate. So the Treasurer's confirming that. Is it one-third funded or one-quarter funded? Yeah, so it is a full-time position.
Thank you.
Counselor Pierce?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And they will deal strictly with trees. Is that what I'm hearing here?
No, Mr. Chair, they will probably provide the technical support for Trees Conservation Committee and tree cutting bylaws. They'll provide technical support and review of environmental impact studies rolling into the planning department. Any other environmental planning initiatives. I'm not an expert in this. Mr. Pomponi's off right now, but he and I had a quick chat about it. He's been promoting this position for a few years right now. So again, any what I would call environmental planning issues rolling through the planning department, review of any environmental plans that are part of subdivision applications, et cetera, et cetera. So again, I think it is it's an area of, as we grow, it's an increasing area of part of the planning process. We would normally be relying on third parties to help us out with this. This will help us out with that.
Counselor Ferrier?
Thank you.
Last, a meeting or two ago, Councillor Chambers brought up the EEE look at speed control, and one of the ways that are most effective to deal with speed control in rural and urban municipalities is utilizing tree canopies on busy roads. So this would be something that would probably lend itself to that as well, which is a strategic direction as a council, as a whole council, we've been really looking for. So this blends nicely into some other issues that the title environmental planner might not, you might not realize that just reading that title, but this would be a big help on that environmental design for speed control.
Councillor Bell?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Michael. I mean, the environment's been with us a long time, so how have we dealt with this issue till now? And if we've been using our resource, I guess that's one of the benefits of taking somebody else on. We free up more time of people that otherwise would be doing this.
Mr. Bradley?
Absolutely, Mr. Chair, and it's a good question, and right now, we've been doing it off the corner of many people's desks. For example, we'd have to do a rewrite of the trees conservation bylaw, and I hate to say it, but I'm probably one of the few people qualified to do that in the organization, and we did give some thought. I think Robin will agree with this. At one point, I said, well, maybe I'll write this thing and try to find the 200 hours that I would need to do that. Likewise, Mr. Trotter will pick up some of the environmental planning slack. Mr. Marcus Davison also has some background on this. So again, right now, we're using, a lot of people are devoting little bits of time. It's not an efficient use of a lot of our time. And so this really does free us with that. So just as an example, the update to the trees conservation bylaw, we did look at some consultants. I think we're probably $50,000 to bring a consultant in to do that. It's a complex field with a lot of legislative change. So this position frees us from that burden that would probably be a decision package in here right now. But it gives us all that extra, I'd like to use the term heft, in the organization to pick up other areas that whether they're not covering or people are trying to ineffectively covering in their current day-to-day. So.
Thank you. Councillor Wheat?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm supporting this. I only have to think back to the situation a year ago that it's now before the courts in St. George. And if we'd have had this individual then, we wouldn't be in a court of law right now.
Any other conversation? Call the vote to put it back in the package. Opposed? It's gone through. 37.
Before we do that, point of
Yep.
information, I'm just wondering, is the tax increase levy, the tax increase line, it's moved from 1.6 to 1.2 to 1.4. Can we get an update on what it currently sits at before we continue to go through? We've added things and the tax increase has gone down, so I'm a little fuzzy on that math.
So, through you, Mr. Mayor, where we are now is the levy to levy increase is 3.9%. The increase to the median home is $35.46 or 1.2%. Where I'm changing the phase-in of the staff, as you approve a staff, then I take the reduction of the phase-in. So just in case you don't approve one of them, I'm trying not to get ahead of myself.
So on the average home, we're looking currently at a 1.2% increase.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Number 37. Any questions to it?
I'll move it.
Councillor Wheat, Councillor Pierce, all those in favor? Thank you, no one's opposed. 38 has been covered. 39. Put it on the floor, please.
I'll move it.
Councillor Wheat and Councillor Howes, any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. 40.
I'll move it.
Thank you, Councillor Wheat. Councillor Laferriere, any discussion? Call the vote.
Actually, I'd like to speak to it.
All right, Councillor Wheat.
The total request is for $150,000 over 3 years. And right now, we're giving them 50 this year, and then we'll have to vote on it again next year and the next year. I'm going to throw this out for conversation. I'd like to give them the whole 150 right now, and I'll move it. This could help us in next year's budget. We won't have to deal with that 50,000. We won't have to deal with it 2 years from now, the 50,000. We're looking at a pretty sensible tax increase right now at 1.5. It's gonna be higher than that, even when we add this 50. But this would also help them because they're gonna mortgage that building, and the extra 100,000 they would get now lessens the principal on their mortgage. And I'm throwing that out there for conversation.
Seconded by Councillor Pierce. Anyone wants to speak to it? Councillor Pierce?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. I seconded it to get it on the floor. I'm not 100% sure that I'm in support of it. If I were to be in support of it and it went through, I would want, and I don't mean this to come out the wrong way, but I would want a guarantee that they're not gonna come back next year for another 50 and the next year for another 50. You know what I mean? So we're giving the 150 over the 3 years all in one lump sum. I just want some sort of guarantee that, you know, because we gave it this year, that they're gonna come back next year
Write that
again.
in.
Councillor Wheat?
Slippery slope.
Oh, Councillor Wheat
just
first,
to-
yeah. Go ahead.
Through you too, Councillor Pierce, I think that can be written in, that we're giving you the 3-year agreement right now up front. That could be written in to the agreement when we give it to, if my suggestion passes. you could write that in.
Counselor Gatward?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would suggest that we wait till we get to the very end, and because they've only asked for 50,000 for this 2019 budget year, and then see what we're at when we get through to the end, and then make a decision on the additional $100,000 that Councillor Weed is suggesting.
Counselor Chambers?
Just through you, perhaps to the treasurer, is it possible to approve $150,000 payable over 3 years?
The staff?
Sorry, what was the question again?
Whether, oh, go ahead.
How would we go about, from the Treasury point of view, of approving the $150,000 payable over 3 years, which would allow us to pay $50,000 this year, $50,000 next year, and $50,000 the next year, and that would prevent them from having to come back and having the, to go through the process again?
I can give a shot at that.
Mr. Radley?
Thank you. Historically, we've done that through agreements, funding agreements, and so St. Joe's comes to mind as a funding agreement. There's a couple of others in the past, and usually there's an agreement that we agree to give them X number of dollars every year for so many years, and then that funding becomes part of the base budget. It doesn't become a decision package. It's included in your base budget as a commitment. So that's usually how we would deal with a long-term funding arrangement. So that could be an option, or I guess one other option could be that you could approve that $50,000 this year, but with direction to staff, I'm just ad-libbing here, but I think to include future amounts in the base budget. That would come to mind as a solution too, so that it be brought forward next year is in the base budget as opposed as a decision package.
Counselor Bell, oh, sorry, Counselor Chambers?
I was just saying, and I like that idea because it does spread the cost over 3 years from a tax point of view, but doesn't diminish the commitment for doing that.
Counselor Bell first?
Yeah, I think Councillor Wheat's idea is a very good one. I think we can trust them. I believe we should be able to trust a charity that's supported by a current MP and the former MPP not to come back and ask for money next year in addition.
Counselor Pierce?
As much as I agree with that statement, in my tenure on council, we've had kind of that backfire on us. So I'm not saying that it will or won't, but we need to be certain. And to Councillor Chambers here, if we can do that, so it's 150,000 now, but it's into the next budget, so it's not the big hit on this year, absolutely in favor of it.
Councillor Ferrier?
I think one of the things that maybe didn't get across when Councillor Wheat was speaking to this is that they may be able to purchase their building sooner with this funding. But that said, there's also nothing stopping them from approaching us next year for the full, or if we agree in principle, if that opportunity exists where they're literally $100,000 between purchasing now or having to wait 3 years, maybe that's something I think this council would receive that information and discuss at that time.
Counselor Coleman?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The ask is for 50,000, and I'm going to support it at 50,000. I think that's what the ask is, and I kind of believe that, and what Michael said, you put it in the budget, it's in the base budget, it's done with for 2020 and 2021, so it's very simple.
Counselor Wheat?
I apologize for throwing that out for discussion and wasting 10 minutes, but I can live with the 50,000 now, but putting 50 and 50 for the next 2 budgets into the base budget next year. Then there won't be any questions asked when the budget comes out. That 50 is already in there, and it'll be in there again in 2021.
So that's what Counselor Wheat's putting on the floor to address this?
Well, actually, I think Councillor Chambers wanted to move that over 3 years with a guarantee. Did you? And if you did,
What I will move is
that it's in the base budget.
commit to $150,000 over 3 years and let Treasury and staff figure out the best way to do that so that $50,000 is raised on this year.
So that comes from Chambers and seconded by Wheat. Any other discussion? All those in favor? Oh, wait a minute, Counselor Pierce?
Just curious, Mr. Mayor, because there was a motion on the table, do we, guys remove that and withdraw it? Because there was a motion seconded on the table, so I'd be in favor
We
Whatever you want to do,
steamrolled
Johnny,
you.
is fine with me. I just want to guarantee their money, and by putting the 100,000 over 2 years into the base
Yeah.
budget for the next 2 years.
You're taking it back then?
Yeah, I'm not debating that, I just want to follow process.
Thank you.
On the table.
I think Counselor Gatward wants to speak before we call the vote. Did you want to? No? Okay, all those in favor? Thank you. I understood what you were trying to do, John, and it would have been a very nice thing, because they could use the
Well,
money now. and
I was married to a mortgage person, and I just know if you've got 100,000 on your principal, it makes it a little bit easier for you. That's all.
Number 41, Counselor Pierce is putting it on the table, seconded by Counselor Laferriere. Conversation, Mr. Pierce wants to speak to it.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, this was one of the other ones that I wanted to speak to, and I don't want to send the wrong vibes here, because these are two very, very important things. I just want to talk through them. Hopefully, nobody throws anything at me at the time. So, if we look at our pages here, it's kind of, they've kind of split it into two. So it's 100,000 for St. Joe's Life Center, and then there's 150,000 for the butterfly model of care, okay? Now, if we just look at the St. Joe's Life Center, okay, again, keep in mind here, folks, I am not against what they do at all. But if we look historically, and we look back to 2004, okay, so since 2004, we've given them about $4 million, okay? Again, I'm not opposed to what they do. I just think it's one of those things that we need to, like, we're not talking a small chunk of change here, and I know it's not a small chunk of change that allows them to do their day-to-day business. I would be, again, this is a tough one to bundle together, because I'm in support of the 100,000 request for the St. Joe's Life Care Center, but I'm not in favor of the full 150 for the other. So I don't know, because it's all in one, I'm not sure if we can separate it or how that's done. But again, I want it, for the record, I'm not opposed to this. I just want to separate them.
Counselor Gatward first.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, the butterfly model of care, there was a presentation by a company that came up with this concept. And this concept is being implemented at the John Noble Home with no increase to the budget. They didn't hire the company, which was $100,000, to do the program at the John Noble. They're implementing it themselves. And we were told that and given the information at our budget session recently. And I think that the Life Care Center can do the same thing. So I think it's a great idea, a great concept, but I don't think, it's like the old idea, do you hire a consultant or do you do it yourself? And many of the ideas, the administrator of the John Noble explained to us, and Councillor Wheat was there, and I believe Mayor Bailey, how they can do this butterfly model without spending all this money. So I'm not going to support that request, because I think they can do the same thing with some creativity. And we had a funding agreement in the past with the Life Care Center, and it's come to an end. And I believe the CAO could confirm that after a certain length of time, they were supposed to be self-sufficient. And we saw that they get a lot of money from the ministry, because it is a long-term care facility, just like the John Noble gets a lot of money from the ministry. And so I have difficulty continuing to support this grant. We didn't get a full budget from them that I requested. We got a abbreviated couple budget sheets. Were they put in our book? Because I couldn't find them today. Or were they on the screen at one time?
Mr. Bradley?
Thank you, Mayor Bailey. There's a couple questions. I think the first question was about the funding. So there was a funding commitment between the city, the county, and the St. Joe's over 2004 to 2013. It's noted in the decision package. And then in 2015, we did a renewed funding commitment for the two parties to each fund St. Joe's on a declining scale over 4 years. And that funding commitment ended last year, 2018. So the question, the financial statements, not the budget, but their financial statements, I believe, were included in the addendum package for St. Joseph's Life Care.
In front of you, yeah.
In today's addendum?
Yeah. Councillor Wheat?
Thank you. If I got an hour. This goes back close to 15 years. When the beds were moved out of the John Noble Home, which I may add, we support. That's one of our buildings, a John Noble Home. Not to say they're in competition, but we support the John Noble Home. The beds were moved out of the John Noble Home to St. Joe's. We had a funding agreement on a declining basis. Approximately 4 or 5 years ago, they come back, they were short of money, and we rewrote that contract and gave them money on a declining basis again, and that ended a year ago. And now here they are back again. Bearing in mind, we operate the John Noble Home. That's one of ours. Now, this butterfly method of care, we have that at the John Noble Home, and it didn't cost us $100,000. We're already doing that. You people are already doing that in our own home, the John Noble Home. I'm not supporting anything on this 250, because we're running our own, we have our own life care center.
Point of information?
It's called the John Noble Home.
Thank you, Councillor Wheat.
Just a point of information as a newbie, does this work like it did with grants, where if we were to call the vote, it's defeated, we could make an amended amount? We have to
Don't think
accept the
so.
250, we can't make another motion for the
I think
100?
we have to entertain what's in front of us.
No, if it's defeated, are we able to then, like we did with community grants, are we able to partially fund?
Madam Clerk, can we partially fund it if it's defeated?
If the motion for the full 250 is defeated, then another motion would be in order for a different amount.
All right, any other discussion? Councillor Chambers?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. I too remember the transformation of the John Noble Home into reduction of beds there and the development of the St. Joseph Care Life Center. And there was an agreement in place, and the agreement was for declining funding until they became self-sufficient, which we were assured that they would. And as John says, we do have a management commitment to the John Noble Home. This was a kind of at one time a shared responsibility with the St. Joseph Life Care Center, and that process has played out, and that's why I'm not supportive of continuing to support the St. Joseph Care Life Center for basically two reasons. We do have the John Noble Home that we're committed to funding, and through the historical agreement, the plan always was to decline the funding until it was, in essence, self-sufficient, so I'm not supporting the request.
Thank you. Any other discussion? I'm going to call the vote to support the decision package as it stands. All those in favor? Opposed? Okay, Mark?
I'd like to make a motion around the $100,000 for St. Joseph's Life Care Center, not the butterfly model care, but that all of it go to the initial $100,000 request. If it's passed, just noting that the county portion, it says here 28%. I'd just like to make the motion whether
Supporting
it
us,
falls or not.
looking for a seconder? Councillor Howes? Any discussion? Councillor Pierce?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So just to understand what you're saying here, you'd be saying 100,000. It wouldn't be 28% of that 100,000.
No, yeah, I'm saying that they asked for 100,000 more generally, and then 150 specific to the butterfly model.
understand that.
I would want it to say around the first piece, because I don't want it going to the butterfly model, because I don't think people here are in support of that money going there either way. So I don't want it being used sort of as they want. To me, it would have to be, I'd have to look for the exact term, but with the initial $100,000 that they asked for in the decision package, let me find it.
Right, my apologies, I thought you had said something about 28%. Our
Oh,
share is
I'm just
28%.
throwing in that there is the county 28% population versus, and funding versus the city portion of 72%.
Okay, so it's,
The motion on the floor is for the 100,000 for the first piece, not including the...
But that did not go to the butterfly model,
Right.
that, I don't think
Right.
this horseshoe's in.
Is there any other discussion? We're going to call the vote to support the decision package of $100,000 for St. Joe's. All those in favor? Opposed?
Okay.
Thank you, it's defeated. 40, Councillor Pierce.
I'd like to do one more kick at the can if I could on this thing, because it is important what they do. And I'd put a motion on to gave what we did last year at 67,920.
Seconder, Councillor Ferrier. Any discussion? Call the vote to support
67,920, same as last year.
67.91, same as last year.
Just to be clear,
Councillor?
this will be a one-time,
One time.
okay, then I'll support that.
Call the vote, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried.
So we're giving 67,
67,920, same as we did last year,
Thank you.
and that's it.
44,
move it.
Councillor Wheat, Councillor Howes, any discussion? Councillor Gatward?
In light of the previous grant, I will move that we amend this amount to $50,000. Seeking a seconder to my amendment.
Yeah, it was pulled.
Did we miss a few there? How did we?
We get past Edmonds already.
Yeah, we just jumped a few there, sir.
That's what we're on, is the hospice right now.
Just a minute.
He said 44.
I said 44, we shouldn't have been on 44. We should be on 42. No, yeah, 42.
Stedman
40
Hospital.
42.
41.
Yeah, it certainly does, all day long.
We're on the Stedman
We're
Hospice,
at
that's what I
42
moved.
Stedman Hospice.
Yes.
You
I
brought it on
moved
the floor.
100,000.
Seconded by Councillor Pierce.
And an amendment was proposed to change it to $50,000.
But shouldn't we defeat the first one first?
Well,
Let's call the vote to,
He's got a seconder for the amendment, yeah.
oh, does anyone want to second Jones' amendment? Apparently not.
okay.
Let's vote on the first one. All those in favor? Bad night, Joan. Where are we now? 43. Put down the floor.
I'll move it.
Councillor Wheat.
I'll move it.
Seconded by Councillor Bell. Any discussion? Councillor Pierce.
So we've had a lot of discussion about this particular one around this horseshoe of late. And I believe we need to look at it in the sense that we own that piece of property. And I think we need to look at it in the sense that, as it is right now, it's a nice little park and a lot of people go there.
Yep.
And I think, you know, this is going to give it the structure that it needs. I think because as it stands right now, there is definitely some work that is required there before it ends up costing us 3 times this amount. So I'm in favor of this, and I think this should do it up nicely, and we should be good for quite some time. But that is our park.
Councillor Wheat, stop tainting the vote, mister, by shaking your
No,
head.
no, I'm supporting the, I'm.
I know you're supporting it. You're almost out of your chair. Would you like to speak to it?
Oh, I'm supporting it.
Of course you are.
It's a lovely little park.
Counselor-
I've got a brick on that wall. I paid for a brick on that wall.
Counselor
I don't want it
Chambers.
to fall down.
Yes,
Councillor Chambers.
and I too support it. I remember when that was barricaded with plywood for many years, and it's a little jewel now for the town of Paris, and anybody that wants to go and repose on the benches and watch the river and see the wall. It's a nice spot, and we need more of them kind of places in the county, so I support it.
Councillor Gatward.
It is a very nice spot. I've been over there a few times. I guess I'm wondering, I don't recall seeing the new design, but they will be incorporating all of the, like Councillor Wheat said, he had a brick. All that will be incorporated back into the new wall, and it will last longer than the last project we did there. Can somebody answer that, please? I think it's, needs to be done, obviously, but.
You're suggesting Councillor Wheat short a brick? Is that what you said?
No, I guess I want assurances that this wall, once we do it, it's going to last. It seems like only a few years ago that we did the park, and now we have to, you know, repair a whole wall. And
Staff's going to speak to it.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. I can't speak to the previous design, but the reason why the costs went up on this project was because it is such a feature in the downtown. So we are going sort of above and beyond on the design as far as the recommendations from the committee go. So I have all assurances that it will be in good shape and will last many years, and I will definitely ensure that any existing or historical features that are there will remain.
do they plan to incorporate all the information that's currently there in the new wall?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the 3 plaques will remain there. They will just be improved upon through the design.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? We're going to call the vote to support the wall. All those in favor? The Bailey Wall. And there won't be Davis Gates. Anyway, calling the last one, 44. Any discussion?
Move it, I want to speak to it.
Councillor Wheat, Councillor Bell, and Councillor Wheat wants to speak to 44.
Yes, what I'd like to do with that 100,000, when we had the OPP inspector here presenting the OP budget, they talked about an enhanced service whereby you hire an officer to do a specific thing. And if we put that 100,000 to an enhanced officer that did speeding, and that's all that officer does, spend 1 day a week in each ward handing out speeding tickets. That officer doesn't go to accidents, doesn't go to domestics. That officer, an enhanced officer, goes for a specific thing. And put that 100,000, I believe the cost of an enhanced officer, correct me somebody, was $184,000 for an enhanced officer. There's 100,000, there's half of it right there. And that's what I would like to see done with that 100,000, because somebody said that night, nothing controls speed like a ticket. And that's what I'd like to see done with that 100,000, to support an enhanced officer to do speeding only.
Thank you. Councillor Gatward first, and Councillor House.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It would be more than half of an officer, so I would suggest also that the county could purchase more of those flashing speed signs for some of our main arterials. They seem to help people slow down. I think they work. I don't know. I think they're around $8,000 a piece. That could be for a simple one, but I would like staff to look into purchasing more of those, and in consultation with our police service, determine best locations for them to be installed and hopefully moved around the county in different locations. As far as an enhanced officer to strictly look at speeding in the county, we all know that that is a concern everyone's in a hurry these days, and if this council supports that, then I would support it as well. I know I have speeding in my community where I live. They've been out there and tried to slow people down. It's still a problem. People do not want to slow down, and perhaps this will work. I don't know, Mayor Bailey, if you have any other suggestions, but those are my comments. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your comments. I think we have to deal with what's in front of us right now. I think you're right, we need other signages and things, and we have directed staff through you to investigate the pricing on it, and we'll determine where they're placed through the county after we decide whether we're going to purchase them.
I don't know if they've included any in the budget.
Not in this page here, not in 44. But we can, Councillor House first.
Well, once again, I find myself in the unique position of agreeing with Councillor Wheat
Scary.
on, and Councillor Gatward.
Scarier.
I don't usually want to embrace or endorse increasing costs beyond what was submitted. However, in this case, I think the people, if we're currently at 2.1% tax increase on the average home, I don't think anyone who lives here would be upset to see that go to 2.2% or whatever the amount. I would like to see the 100,000 boosted to allow us to be able to do the law enforcement portion and the technology signs around the county portion. I'm wondering if we could vote against the 100,000, and then I would want to propose boosting it to 150,000 to increase all of the measures that we can apply to speed control in the county.
So Councillor Wheat's proposal plus Councillor Gatward's proposal of signage.
Yeah.
So let's vote on the 100,000 and see if we can defeat it. Oh, Councillor Chambers? The second one? Okay.
Again, I may be missing the point, but I think other people are missing the point as well. Enforcement does control speeding, there's no question about that. So does technology, that controls speeding, there's no question about that. So does educating about speeding, that impacts speeding as well. So rather than rely on one exclusively, or the other exclusively, or the other exclusively, what this is doing is funding a program, 3 E's, enforcement, education, and engineering, for a program that combines all we've been talking about into a strategy to reduce speeding in the county. You can have a speed trap in Caledonia, or at Canesville, that's not doing anything in Harley. You can have a speed spy in St. George, and that's not doing anything for Calvin. You need a comprehensive program, and that's what this is funding. My understanding is what the funding is for, and that was my request going back when. So whether it's 100 or 150, education, enforcement, engineering, hand in hand to comprehensively address speeding in the county.
Councillor Ferrier.
I'm in the not so unique position of agreeing with Councillor Chambers. I seconded the initial motion, and I want to thank staff for bringing this to us in the budget so quickly. Whether it's $100,000 or $150,000, I do think we need to vote on what's in front of us in this, and that is the 3E strategy, which includes some of those things. But we are still putting pressure on county OPP around less warnings and more tickets, and we are utilizing other measures to push them. Plus, they're opening up a community policing model where they're going to receive input. And guess what? They're going to hear from the public loud and clear at those town halls that they're going to do about these issues, and probably on more than 60 roads, as Councillor Chambers once brought up. So I think that the wheels are in motion. Excuse the pun, that wasn't meant. And also that I think this is going to be a continuing budget item in future years. This $100,000 now, we may want to hold our powder, vote for it, but hold our powder, because we may be looking, in order to be effective this pilot, looking at 200, 300,000 in future years. So I'm going to support the motion as it stands. I'd also support 150, but this is going to be an ongoing thing. We'll be putting more resources into this over the term.
Thank you. Mr. Bradley first.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I just wanted to clarify that this money and whatever money you budget, we would support, but it's for a yet-to-be-determined strategy. So okay, we actually have a meeting, I think, next week at the staff level, and I'm going to suggest we do a field tour of a couple of other communities I've been through to look at some strategies. But this is funds for a yet-to-be-determined strategy that will be presented to you that you can vote on, and that would be the time when you can say more enforcement, less signage, et cetera, et cetera. So I think, just to clarify that that's what we're proposing right now. It's not a strategy per se, it's an amount to implement a yet-to-be-determined strategy. So hopefully that clarifies.
Thank you. Councillor Wheat first.
Yeah, I would encourage members of this committee not to vote against this 100,000. Support it, and then down the road, enhance it. I would really like to hire another officer that just does speeding, because hit them in the pocketbook, points on their license, works more than a flashing sign, because we've got one in St. George, coming in from the south end. Does it work? No.
Councillor House.
Question, though, on the 100 versus 150. We just heard the CAO say that this strategy has not been determined.
That's right.
This $100,000 is a placeholder to basically just say, we figure if we have 100 grand, once we have our strategy, we can implement it, probably 100 grand. I'm saying if it's going to be good at 100 grand, won't it be a lot better at 150?
Councillor Bell first.
I've been waiting since I've been on council to draw parallels between this organisation and the United States House of Congress. Right at the moment, there are 15 or so Republicans and Democrats trying to decide how best to defend the southern border. This is our southern border in equivalent. I mean, John Wheat is quite correct. And in some places, we're going to need the hard measure of a policeman standing there giving out tickets. Robert's quite correct as well. There are going to be other parts where we need different solutions. We go back to the earlier part of our conversation. This is one of those things that we won't get up and running probably till mid-year. So our $100,000 probably goes further in this given year than we perhaps are giving it credit to. I wouldn't object to 150 either.
Councillor Wheat.
Yeah, I think we should approve the 100, and then I'm going to remind Councillor Howes, you and I have agreed on a lot of things.
More than I would expect.
But if you're going to embrace somebody, please embrace Councillor Gatward and not me. But what I think you need to do is
Oh, dear.
approve this 100, and then I'll support a subsequent motion that you want to craft to put in X number of dollars more. But approve the 100,000, keep that there, and then bring forward a separate motion, and I'll second it. You craft the words, and I'll second it.
Councillor Coleman. Just to stop Councillor Wheat from talking.
That ain't gonna work, Coleman.
I'm not supporting 100,000 because it's not enough. And I don't think even 150,000 is enough, because it's just a Band-Aid. It's 180 grand roughly to get an officer, car, and whatnot like that. So you gotta get more than that. Those good signs, correct me if I'm wrong, I'll be back there somewhere, I think they're around 25,000. The good signs. The one in St. George, to me, is not the greatest sign, because it doesn't give your speed until you're right on top of the damn thing. The ones in Brantford, I'm not sticking up for Brantford, they show your speed well back. But then I like to say how fast I can get going, so I get to that sign, just to tease them.
Yeah.
They don't do anything if they don't get you in the pocketbook.
That's right.
The pocketbook, well, you're got a fine and an insurance. I think there's a general manager just got nailed the other day. I'm not going to mention anybody's name, but I know how much that's going to cost her. She got
Well, that relieves Bradley.
So the pocketbook helps when you get it, but I think it's only a Band-Aid at 100,000, and I can't support that. You want to do it, you got to do it right.
Councillor House first, and then Councillor Chambers.
I would like to see us call the vote on the $100,000, and then I would like the opportunity to make a separate motion on an additional batch of funds for enhanced law enforcement.
Okay, Councillor Chambers still needs to speak before we call the vote, because I saw his hand.
And I'd just like to invite Councillors Wheat and Councillor Coleman to come with me. And we'll park an empty police cruiser on the approach into Burford, and we'll sit back and watch the brake lights come on as people slow down. Then what we'll do, we'll hide that police cruiser behind a tree so that people can't see it, and you won't see one brake light come on, so you're not decreasing the speeding. You may catch a speeder, but you're not addressing the speeding. So if you want to address the speeding, you put something out there where people can see and they'll slow down. That's the engineering point of view. And we all know when we see a police car, we slow down. And we all have got tickets by police cars that we didn't see. And we learn not to speed, but it's just as plain as day, to slow people down. You don't need a ticket, you need a visual awareness of a threat, and people put their brake lights on every time.
Councillor Gatward, your next, speak quickly because they're going to lynch me here.
Thank you. Well, this is February, and we're not going to be able to hire an officer for a whole year at this point in time. There's a shortage of officers. The police college is not full these days. So I think that $100,000 is enough for now. If we want to add more money next year, but we might, if we request an officer for traffic, as I believe Inspector Anderson called it, a traffic officer, we might not get that officer till September. So it's only part of a year, and $100,000 is plenty, and we can buy signs if we wish.
Thank you. Councillor Pierce is going to be the last speaker, and then we're going to call the vote on the 100,000. Councillor Pierce.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I haven't spoken on this one. I've listened to this conversation going around, and thank you, Councillor Chambers, because you've hit it. And to me, if we go past our police station every day, there's at least 7 or 8 cruisers in there that are just sitting there all day long. So I'm wondering, I'm in full support of the 100 here, but I'm wondering if we can take advantage of those police cruisers that are sitting in that parking lot all day and move them around the county for that exact reason. And he's absolutely right. You see a police car, everybody puts the brakes on. I understand that if you were to keep it in the same spot, there's potential of damage and that sort of thing. But I think if they moved them around the county and made use of those vehicles, that may help us out in the start.
Just think how many cardboard cutouts.
Okay, so what we're going to do
Call the
now,
vote for 100.
what we're going to do now is we're going to call the vote to support in the decision package the 100,000 for the road speed control strategy, which hasn't really been determined. All those in favor of the 100,000? Opposed? What were we talking about then? Are you kidding me? Councillor Howes, what could you possibly have to say? Yikes. Councillor Howes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you, and I always forget to say that. I would like to make a motion for an additional $50,000 to be allocated through our police services for increased police attention to speeding this year through whatever method they have, whether it's cardboard cutouts of police cars hiding behind trees or inflatable police cars, whatever they can do with an extra $50,000, and I'm looking for a seconder on that.
There should be a ton of them. Councillor Wheat. Okay. All those in favor of an yeah. Come on. Oh, Mark, what? Yes.
I won't be supporting the motion because if it's going specifically to the police, we have to work out a specific agreement. The Ontario Police College is not empty. This is a field I work in. This is the folks I train. I think that money would be better utilized into the road speed control issue. And if there's leftover funds, then we could work that into a law enforcement issue later. If we commit to something like hiring a quarter of an officer for a quarter of a year, we're going to have to stay committed to that the next year. Nobody's going to come in for 3 months to do that. So this is where I think we need to think a little more broadly, like Councillor Chambers has asked us to.
Okay, it's on the floor for 50,000 extra, seconded. Any other conversation? Councillor Pierce?
So I agree with Councillor Ferrier here. Are we going to designate it to this, additional to this purpose? We're not pinpointing it to this or that. We're going for road speed control, an extra 50,000.
Councillor Howes, clarification, please.
Yeah, just clarifying my own motion to the $50,000 extra to the road speed control, however it ends up being spent.
Perfect, thank you.
Any other conversation? Councillor Gatward.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have a contract with the OPP, and we would have to look at enhancing that with them if we're planning to ask for additional traffic officer or part-time traffic officer, whatever the strategy comes out as and this council supports. So I am not going to support the additional $50,000 at this time. I think we need to wait and see how we do this year with this extra dollars and the strategy, and then we can add more next year if necessary. Last year we had over a 3% increase, so I think it would be good to give the taxpayers a break and keep it down under 2.5 this year, which we're doing.
We're doing very well.
Thank you.
Any other conversation? Call the vote for the additional $50,000. Opposed? Carried. That's it. That was painful. No, Councillor Pierce.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So now that that's all done, hopefully I didn't snooze and lose here, but this was something that I was going to bring up tonight, and hopefully I'm not too late. When we were doing our base budget and that, quick question if I could for you to the CAO. The boundary revenue that we're getting from Brantford, that's all factored into the base. So we've already approved that then? Because where I was going with this, Mr. Mayor, if I could, Councillor Boma, who's now moved on to other things, him and I were kind of the drivers of getting our asset management where it is today. And what I was going to propose, if this council would be in favor of it, is at this point, we're getting 1.163,350 from Brantford on a yearly basis for the land transfer. What I was going to suggest, and I know we're putting money into asset management on a yearly basis, I was going to bring a motion forward that we put an additional $250,000 of that into our asset management as well. Yes, we're at the point where the government says we should be at our 9 million, but I think we all understand that there's a lot of work that needs to be done in our county over the next several years. And if we look at it, we're getting that 1.1 through to 2027. I know we can't make decisions on future councils and such like that, but I would really like this council to think about earmarking 250,000 of that to go directly into asset management. Thank you.
Seeking a seconder? It's just information, right?
Yeah,
There's
I
nothing
want to
we can do with
understand if that can be done first.
Mr. Bradley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. So first of all, the boundary revenues are already included in revenue lines in the budget.
Yeah.
I think we reviewed those at the beginning of the budget process.
Right.
You can add any additional amounts for any reason you want, as long as, until such time as you approve the budget. In fact, you can continue to add funds to it until we essentially start levying taxes. At that point, it becomes a little harder because we've already billed the taxpayers. So in terms of what I could speak, I mean, in terms of asset management, we have a capital budget. It's a $9.3 million tax levy plus some other funds from other sources. We talked about that last week.
Yep.
I think it's, as part of the strategic planning process, we're also going to be, as I see it, you'll be receiving a report on the strategic planning process at CDC on Monday. But I visualize us basically doing a bit of a capital plan, a longer-term capital plan for new infrastructure. And so, again, I mean, council can do what it wishes. My suggestion is you should wait for strategic planning, because I think there are pending large capital needs for this county, mostly around new builds, new stuff that we don't have, and and that it's going to be another big budget challenge going forward for the community, and we'll certainly work with council and staff. We'll work together to achieve that challenge. But that's our approach at this point. We aren't looking for additional capital. It could be spent. There's lots of projects out there, but that's council's decision. So hopefully that answers the question.
Okay. No, as I say, I think it's as we all know, it was something we were way behind in, our asset management. It is something that's very, very important. And I just want to make sure with, you know, a lot of things that are going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years in this county that, you know, an extra $250,000 a year is just going to allow us to do things, potentially expedite a few things that don't come back to bite us. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, we're now moving on to number 8. Does the clerk want to take that over?
I can speak to
Oh.
that.
Michael?
Certainly, Mr. Chair, this is a report. This is the Treasurer's annual report as per the Municipal Act. It's required under the Municipal Act for us to report certain things before we approve the budget, and they are amortization expenses, post-retirement costs, and whether we include or exclude monies for post-closure landfill costs. So the treasurer can speak to this report in further detail if council wishes, but it acknowledges that we have funds in the budget for post-employment benefit costs. It notes that we have funds in the budget that exceed what our annual cost of amortization would be through the capital budget. And it confirms that we do not have funds in the budget for post-closure landfill costs. And we can speak further to that if anyone wishes. Otherwise, the report will need to be approved.
Does anyone want the treasurer to come up and report on anything? No? Councillor Gatward?
I just want to say this is standard, and we do it every year. And when we do landfill closures, we bite the bullet and pay the costs at the time. And it's always noted in the audit about the employee benefits and the things that Heather's mentioned in her report.
Okay. Any other comments or concerns? Call the vote to accept?
Move to receive.
Oh, move and receive, sorry, Coleman and
We do actually need the recommendation approved, not received.
Okay, move the recommendation.
okay, Coleman and Councillor Wheat. Any other discussion? All those in favor? Opposed, carried, okay. And then number 9, Michael?
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, it's usually customary for us now to take a 2-minute recess and allow the treasurer to compile the final budget recommendation if council is prepared to consider and approve that. So, it's up there, so.
We're just
They're ahead of me. So the recommendation to approve the budget, which would be the final recommendation of the committee, the whole report that would be considered, is stated in the box at the bottom there. So.
Councillor Coleman,
I will move that is before us. Get it on
okay.
the floor.
Seconded by Councillor Bell. Any discussion? Councillor Chambers.
Mr. Mayor, I would like to maybe make a suggestion and perhaps an amendment with regard to the grant program. Throughout the year, we're going to be asked for grants that will be forthcoming at various times that we are not expecting now. And we always put a little bit we have a grant reserve, I don't know, $4,000 or $5,000. My question is, how much was that? I've forgotten, and is it enough? Like, if you put another $5,000, it's not going to affect the bottom line at all, but it may, in fact, enable us to provide a grant that we may not foresee, that might be, help somebody go to Czechoslovakia with a hockey team or something like that. Who knows?
Okay,
Mr. Mayor, through you, so $5,000 was included in the budget right now for unallocated grants that'll pop up over the course of the year. So one thing I could mention, I mean, it would not stop council from awarding a grant if they felt it was appropriate. We have historically brought a surplus forward, and occasionally we have, the treasurer will be analyzing the budget over the course of the year, and if a grant came forward, we could say that. Whether we anticipate having a surplus, which would allow council to make a decision at the time. The other option would be to budget more money for those unallocated grants.
you okay with that? Okay, so we have it on the floor by Councillor Coleman, seconded. Any other conversation before we vote on approving the budget? Call the vote to approve the budget. All those in favor?
Recorded vote.
Recorded vote. Who stands up first? Stand up.
Could we have the treasurer put up the tax increase and the levy and
It's,
everything as well that goes with that?
I'll just start.
2.2.
Yeah. Not one at a, all right. Is everyone looking at the 2.2?
And it's a 4.8%
Levy
levy.
increase. 2.2 is the big number of the day. It's not that big. Wished it was 2, but it's not. All those in favor? Thank you. Opposed? A motion to reconvene as a council. Councillor Pierce, seconded by Councillor House. We remain a council. Any new business? Anything for the betterment of anyone's health? Motion to adjourn. We stand adjourned. Thank you.
I want to see it.